First, SportsCenter breaking news.
The New York Jets are hiring their former player, Aaron Glenn, as their next head coach.
Welcome to Subway Sports Talk.
Dan,
12th pick in this
clear up the closing doors, please.
Defensive back, Texas A&M.
Every time you put your feet on the ground that morning, you felt like you was winning that game. At some point, man, we got to draw a line in the sand. Said enough is enough.
And there we go. Aaron Glenn is the new head coach of the New York Jets. Welcome to Subway Sports Talk. My name is Peter Kennedy. I'm your host. Joined with me is Pat Boyle to talk about nothing else but the New York Jets making their announcement that Aaron Glenn from Detroit Lions, former Jet, former first-round pick like you heard in the clip, will be the coach of the New York Jets. Pat, welcome back. It's been a minute since we talked on the podcast. It's good to see you, brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I know you've been pumping out content. You, Didino, Cody, everybody else on the SST crew. I feel like I had to make everybody remember. Patty Boyle's still up in this bitch cooking. So good to be back with you.
Up in this bitch cooking. I love it. And also up in this bitch cooking finally is the New York Jets. I mean, we've been sitting here for weeks now, feels like months, with the Jets head coaching and general manager jobs just in the open. They interviewed 9,000. I think it was 9,000, right? 9,000 people they interviewed for this job. But it did feel like there was a shift and that Aaron Glenn would be the name. Obviously, a former player for the New York Jets, a guy who we've now seen in the spotlight as the DC for the Detroit Lions. Did not exactly go out with a bang, Patrick, but here we are. And Pat Boyle at Pat Boyle 44. Here we are with Aaron Glenn officially becoming the Jets head coach. So what was your reaction, and did you expect this to happen for the Jets?
I mean, I feel like it became pretty abundantly clear by Monday that it was that they wanted Aaron Glenn. Once Vrabel went to New England, once Ben Johnson went to Chicago, and he was never really ever going to take the Jets job. But look, man, I want to like it, right? I want to be a fan of this. And I'm trying to not let the Jets past, I don't know, decade, however back further you want to go. I mean, right, they made back-to-back AFC championship games. So from there on out, the last 14 years of misery where they haven't made a playoff appearance and they've tried several different head coaches, you know, the worst Adam Gase, Robert Saleh. I felt like it could have worked, but, you know, again, just so many extenuating circumstances. So like I'm trying to not get sucked into, well, it's the same old Jets. They'll Aaron Glenn, as great as he was as the defensive coordinator with the Lions and all the injuries they had, and they did give up 45 to Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, but the regular season that they had, winning 15 games, he's a former Jet. It says it's his dream job. Like, I'm trying not to get bogged down in the Jets' past mediocrity and failures, but I also, like, it plays a part, man. It plays a part when it's the same owner, when it's Woody Johnson making the decision, and you don't have a general manager yet. Well, looking like it's going to be Lance Newmark, who also was with Detroit, who's been with Detroit for the last 2.5 decades. So I guess, up until 3 years ago when they sucked for 20 years straight, I guess it didn't matter what Lance Newmark did there. But now the last 3-4 years, Lance Newmark, yes, now he's qualified to be a general manager, whatever. It's just the fact that it feels like they're doing the same thing again, Pete. They're doing the same damn thing that they just did 3 years ago, 4 years ago. You hired a defensive coordinator from one of the best teams in football, Saleh from the Niners. You gave him a first-time offensive coordinator in Mike LaFleur. We'll see who the offensive coordinator is going to be for Aaron Glenn. Chances are it's going to be a first-time offensive coordinator. And you've got a GM. Last time they had Joe Douglas in place already, but now you're hiring, again, it's a first-time head coach who's a defensive guy. Who the hell knows who the offensive coordinator is going to be? And you haven't picked the GM yet. Out of every team that, when they went through this process that said we shouldn't do this backwards. We should hire the GM first. We should let him pick his head coach, or we should pair the GM and the head coach together. It's the Jets. It's the Jets that should have done that. And instead, they make the same head coaching hire that they did 4 years ago, and they don't have the general manager yet. How can you do that? So, I could say, Aaron Glenn's going to be phenomenal. He's going to be the next Bill Belichick, right? I could also say Aaron Glenn's going to be the next Robert Saleh. We
Right.
don't really know, but the process that the Jets undertook, where you said it, they talked to 9,000 people. They talked to several dozen GM candidates and several dozen head coaching candidates, and there's still a couple of good head coaching candidates on the board. And they go first-time head coach, defensive guy, without picking the GM yet. And you can't make it up just how stupid this franchise looks, and it looks like they're making the same mistakes again. So now at this point, and we'll get into now once they have a GM and head coach, is Aaron Rodgers going to come back? Who the hell is going to play quarterback next year? But like just, when you're putting the biggest puzzle pieces together of the puzzle, you put the big ones down first. You don't put the little ones not in the corners and the weirdest spots of the puzzle. That's what the Jets have done. And that's what they do. So I can't be happy with this hiring. I can't just tell you, yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Aaron Glenn, I'll run through a wall for him because that's what the Lions did, and he coached on Dan Campbell's staff. Robert Saleh coached on a Super Bowl caliber coaching staff, and the coaches that they had before, for the most part, coached on great coaching staffs. I want to like it, and I like Aaron Glenn. He's a former player, but man, it just feels like the Jets are setting themselves up for failure again.
When you're trying to inspire confidence in a fan base, they did that in the easiest way possible. They picked a name of somebody who Jets fans know, who they have fond memory of, and they could say, he knows the organization. He knows what he's stepping into, right? That's the easy way out. So I feel like this was an easy way out of saying, hey, everyone's all pissed about hiring the next hot coordinator. Everyone doesn't want the next coordinator anymore. Well, how about one that you know and love, right? That was like their little happy medium, because Aaron Glenn obviously was just one of these hot coordinators out there, right? He's defensive coordinator, never been a head coach, which is okay. Let me be clear about that. That is okay. Look at the coaches right now in the playoffs here. Even if you include last week and you include McVay, like he's one of the longer tenured head coaches here. Most of them are in their first head coach job, right? Dan Quinn is one, and Andy Reid are the only two that are not. McDermott wasn't a head coach before. Sirianni wasn't a head coach before. If you go back, Harbaugh, this was his first one. I know he's been there forever, but like this is okay. It's okay to hire a first-time head coach, but your point is exactly accurate. The order of operations seems wrong, because now in the cynic's eyes, what does this do? You hire Aaron Glenn. Now you bring in a GM. If things don't go to plan, what can that GM say, Pat? It's not my hire. It's not my coach. I didn't pick him. So let me pick my guy, right? So sorry for the bad rhetorical setup there. But here we are, a couple years down the road. The Jets, maybe they middle in the pack there. Maybe they have some okay years. And then all of a sudden, you're figuring out, what's the next move to make this team even better? And the GM goes, you know what? Aaron Glenn, you did okay. But he's not my guy. And now he has to pick a new coach. And if that doesn't go well, then you get to get rid of both of them again and start this whole process all over again. That's the cynic's view, right? But the Saleh thing is a perfect example here. The Robert Saleh story could have worked. Whether you loved or hate Robert Saleh, there was absolutely a path to success for him as the head coach of the New York Jets. There was. He was close. He got to 7 wins twice with horrible quarterback play. The Aaron Rodgers injury absolutely dismantled another season, and they still competed that year. Now, this year was an absolute shitfire disaster. So, yeah, it's easy to say, well, it didn't work out. Why would it have ever worked out? Well, if you have that view, then go ahead and be miserable again this year, because there's a chance that Aaron Glenn can be a good head coach. I think it's reasonable to believe he's a good hire, but time will only tell. Who will the offensive coordinator be? Who will the general manager be? All these things matter immensely. And right now, the Jets get to boast that they got a guy who looks great on TV, does great interviews, has great quotes, was just part of a winning franchise for the last 2-3 years. But the whole picture is not painted yet. So for all the hype that you can have, there's a lot of stuff holding Jets fans back, and I think rightfully so, Pat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it just, there's like so many angles of this that you can use as like really good bullet points to have optimism in Aaron Glenn. He's a Bill Parcells disciple. He speaks regularly with Bill Parcells. I mean, his defense, what he did with the Lions defense speaks for itself. Like there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm not going to be the one judging him and saying, well, look at this, Look what just happened against Jane Daniels and the Commanders. The biggest spots he melted down. And I don't want to look at that. I look at the fact that he inherited the worst scoring defense in 2021 when he became Dan Campbell's defense coordinator. And then this past year, they went all the way up to 7th in scoring defense. And that was, again, despite all those injuries. So, yeah, I mean, that, the too many men on the field against the Commanders in the playoff game, like that kind of shit can't happen as a head coach. So, like, right away, just like Saleh, in the first 2 years as a head coach, felt like he didn't know when to use his timeouts. Felt like he was indecisive on whether or not to go for it, and we really didn't know kind of what did Robert Saleh do. So I just hope that Aaron Glenn has, and we look at some of the worst head coaching hires in the last couple of years. Nate Hackett, who that by the way, of course, Jets offensive coordinator. Jets offensive coordinator. I'm holding up air quotes here for the last year and a half until he had his coloring book taken away from him in the second half of this year. Basically Aaron Glenn, if he has to have somebody follow him the entire game and say, hey, coach, remember, do you have 3 timeouts left, or we have 1 timeout left, or here's a situation, 2-minute drill, like where are we trying to get down to here? Do you want to challenge that? What are we looking? Are we going to go for it if it's 4th and 2 here? Like, he better have that shit ready to go, man. It's a first-time head coach. And there is kind of this toxic aura around the New York Jets that in the last decade plus that what can go wrong will go wrong. And, again, I think the biggest thing is, are they going to have Aaron Rodgers back? I don't want Aaron Rodgers back. I'd rather Aaron Glenn and have the GM, by the way, whoever they hire, is, again, they've done this totally freaking backwards. If there's one franchise that shouldn't have done it backwards, it's the Jets. So that's another reason why I just can't have confidence in this. But no matter who the quarterback is, like, Aaron Glenn's got to make sure that everything he brought with him as the Lions DC, just like Dan Campbell, like the guy that you would run through a wall for, like, he's got to be himself. He's got to be that guy. He can't try to be a different guy now that he's the head coach of the Jets. He's got to be the same guy that he was the defense coordinator with for the Lions, but he's got to make sure, again, I don't care if you have 13 freaking assistant coaches on the sidelines, and we're wondering, what the hell does this guy do? I don't care if it helps Aaron Glenn be a better head coach. That guy better do his job, and Aaron Glenn better do his job. Like, for once, it's one thing, and he's a defensive guy, right? And the Jets offense forever now sucks. So, like, you can't blame that on him, no. And you couldn't blame it on Robert Saleh. Yeah. You got to make sure that your defense is not sloppy. I don't want the Jets better be in the top 15. They better be in the top half of the league in penalties, like, in a good way. Like, they better not be freaking undisciplined like they've been for the last 3 years. He better know when to use his timeouts, and he better know clock management, and whether or not he wants to be a guy like Dan Quinn and Dan Campbell that goes for it all the time on 4th down, or if he wants to be the opposite, like Antonio Pierce. Antonio Pierce, it's fine. I don't know. Not everybody's got to be Dan Campbell and Dan Quinn. You could be conservative, because if you have a good defense, you keep yourselves in games that way. Mike Tomlin's been one of the most conservative coaches in the NFL in the last 20 years since he's been there. So I just want to make sure that Aaron Glenn knows what kind of head coach he's going to be, and that it's reflective of the guy that he was in Detroit. I hope that, first and foremost. And then after that, whoever you hire as the offensive coordinator, let the offense take care of itself. But that defense better play the way that we know they can, because they were a massive disappointment. So, he's the head they were soft. So, he's the head coach. He's not the defensive coordinator anymore, but we know he's a defensive guy. And the Jets defense, for the most part, when Saleh was there, they were dogs. And when Saleh got fired, and they were kind of soft the first couple of games too, but especially after Saleh got fired, that defense got soft. They were undisciplined, and I better not see that under Aaron Glenn.
There's so many good things that you brought up there. The first thing I'm going to start with is Aaron Glenn being himself, right? Because what you see when people leave some of the great coaches is they try too hard to be themselves. Eric Mangini, famously, right? When he became the Jets head coach, he said it outright many a times. I tried to be Bill Belichick, and I'm not Bill Belichick, right? So whatever Aaron Glenn learned from Dan Campbell, you can look at as a positive, but he can't be Dan Campbell if he's not Dan Campbell. He has to be Aaron Glenn, right? And what you've seen from him on that season of Hard Knocks, when you've seen him, on the sideline in press interviews and things of that nature, he carries himself with great confidence. He can give an interview. He seems like he can command a room, which is something that Robert Saleh did seem to kind of struggle with. Obviously, we don't know the full extent, but he didn't obviously look a great light in their season of Hard Knocks. So Aaron Glenn seems to be positive in that manner. I'm super interested in who he goes with the offensive coordinator here, because I look at two different examples. Vic Fangio, right, is a guy who's dabbled as a head coach, but now has bounced around as a DC. And it's got to be a little bit difficult from an ego perspective as a younger head coach to hire somebody who's been there before you, who's been a head coach before, who is a household name. But to put your ego aside and take that decision for the betterment of the team is huge. Kind of like Ryan Day. That's my second example here. Taking in Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly's a guy with a big ego, a lot of ideas, a lot of juice. And Ryan Day, who's an offensive guy, pulled in a very famous head coach to be his offensive coordinator, right? So that decision really shows you how comfortable and confident Ryan Day was in his position. Aaron Glenn needs to have that same attitude. I thought you saw some great things out of him in that Hard Knocks when him and I think it was Ben Johnson, right? Going back and forth, yelling at each other, having great fun, great energy, great competitive nature during their practices. That's exactly what the Jets fans want. And I think that's a win at the end of the day. We just have to see who's going to come alongside of him. Is it a no-name with the possibility of being next boy genius? Or is it going to be a more established play caller, maybe a guy who's been a head coach before, who's now back in the role? You look at a Cliff Kingsbury type, another guy who it's like, hey, I got fired as a head coach, but I still know what I am. And Dan Quinn saying, hey, come with me. We got this. That's an ego thing that's a positive to me. It's a confidence thing that's a positive to me, where you're comfortable in your own skin to bring someone along with you who is that guy, who's been there before, who can handle his own business. So I'm super interested to see where he goes with that. So Pat, let me ask you this straight up. Obviously, the GM thing aside, they didn't pick a GM yet. They don't have the coordinators yet. Is Aaron Glenn the guy that you would have chosen to be the Jets head coach?
No, he's not. I wanted Vrabel, so that kind of go.
Yeah, but let's be real though. Like, Vrabel wasn't coming to the Jets. So besides Vrabel, perhaps, and besides Ben Johnson, they were never coming.
Yeah. Once Vrabel was gone, and I never thought Ben Johnson would have come here. And honestly, I don't know if I would have even hired Ben Johnson. I mean, you could say, how can you not? Look what he did with that offense, and look what he turned Jared Goff into, and all the creativity and the aggressiveness. And either way, if it wasn't Vrabel, I wanted Matt Nagy.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's who I wanted. I wanted Matt Nagy. I think that's a guy that, again, has experience, has head coaching experience. And sure, I mean, it didn't necessarily go all that well in Chicago. Who has it gone well for in Chicago? But how about Matt Nagy? He's got the only winning record in the last decade for the Chicago Bears when they went 12-4 in 2018. He goes 8-8 in 2019, 8-8 in 2020, 6-11 in 2021. So yeah, he's got 4 solid years of head coaching experience in a place that has been just as tough to win at as the New York freaking Jets. He's from New Jersey. Not that means a lot, but Matt Nagy's from Denellen, New Jersey. Then went to high school in Pennsylvania. But anyway, grew up in Denellen, which is literally like 10 minutes from me. And I think that what he's done at the last, couple of years here as the Chiefs offensive coordinator, if there's a team that I want to pluck somebody from, it's the freaking Kansas City Chiefs. And sure, when you have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid's the head coach, you're going to look really good as the offensive coordinator. But he was also the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs in 2016 and 2017. And I thought he did a great job back then as well. And he's worked under Andy Reid for a long time. We talk about, the Bill Belichick tree, or we talk about, the Bill Parcells tree, or all this guy, the Kyle Shanahan tree. I don't really hear too much about the Andy Reid tree. And Matt Nagy's been a pretty damn good coach in whatever role he's been in for the last 10, 15 years here. So that's who I wanted. I wanted an offensive-minded guy rather than a defensive-minded guy because, again, that's what the Jets just did.
I think
First-time head coach.
They've done it many times.
Yeah,
I think I saw it was 8 out of 9. 8 out of
9
9 of their last head coaches were defensive-minded guys.
Yeah, and most of those guys were first-time head coaches as well. So I would have rather gone after Matt Nagy, a guy that's been a head coach in Chicago, and again has been with the Chiefs, has been with the Eagles, was the head coach of the Bears. That would have been my pick, and a guy that I don't know, maybe probably would have wanted the job.
I think that's a way to look at it too, because I feel like a lot of people get really quick to judge somebody if they failed once, right? Like you failed once, that's all people know you as, so now you can't do it. Cliff Kingsbury had to go to Washington for him to get another head coach job in the future if he wants it, right? And now, next year, if the Commanders have another year similar to this one or better, which they easily can with all the cap space and Jaden Daniels, Cliff Kingsbury will be the next head coach next summer, next offseason, right? So Matt Nagy failed once in varying degrees of success, even though he had some winning records, which is pretty freaking impressive when you remember that Mitch Trubisky was the freaking quarterback of that team, and he's hot garbage, right? So it's very easy to remember the negative, especially when it ends on a bad note. But you have to remember here, in this world that we live in with football, 99% of people end on a bad note. You either don't make the playoffs or you lose and you get called a fraud by half of society, right? Lamar Jackson's a fraud. Jared Goff's a fraud. Justin Herbert's a fraud. Whoever loses this week, if it's Josh Allen, he'll be a fraud too. Like, everybody's a fraud. The only one who's fraud-free right now is Patrick Mahomes and Jaden Daniels because he's a rookie. Everyone else who loses in the playoffs is a fraud, according to America, right? So when you lose as a head coach and you get fired, you're labeled a fraud. You can't be a head coach, but that's not the case, right? You do see people go on to their second jobs and have success. Now, granted, there's a ton of people right now who are still in their first coach job. I think I did some math the other day. It was like 19 out of the 26 coaches who were hired were first-time head coaches. Now, you look at Tomlin and Harbaugh and McVay and Shanahan. They've been there for a long time. They're the longest tenured coaches. But the rest who you feel kind of good about, Kevin O'Connell, first-time head coach. Dan Campbell, first-time head coach. So, yeah, of course, you got to kind of get lucky with some of these guys, and more people will fail than not. But that should be looked at as a positive for a candidate like Aaron Glenn, because you don't know till you know. And right now, he seems to have the ingredients to be a positive head coach for a football team.
Well said, Pete. Well said.
Yeah. So now the quarterback comes into question. The GM comes into the question. The offensive coordinator comes into question. And then all that stuff. It just becomes another, circusy offseason for the New York Jets, which is difficult but true. And it doesn't mean, one thing or another for what it's going to be like come September. But we do know that every move, especially in this market, has a magnifying glass right on top of it. And the OC will be a massive move. The GM's going to be a massive move. And we'll see where the Jets go. What's your gut say, Pat, before we say goodbye here? This is a short episode. Is Aaron Rodgers the quarterback of the New York Jets next year?
It feels like he's going to, because it feels like that's the safe thing to do rather than try to take a gamble on Justin Fields, who I've been screaming that I want to be the Jets quarterback in 2025, that I do think that this defense still has a hell of a lot of talent on it, despite how soft and how mediocre they were at times, failing to protect a couple of leads they did have this year. That game against Indianapolis really stuck out to me. I was like, damn, this defense just, it didn't make sense. I do think there's still a lot of talent on that defense. I do think the Jets could win 10 games and be a playoff team next year if Justin Fields is the quarterback. And every other piece that's still on the team, the core guys, Sauce Gardner, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, remains the same. If they could find a way, if Devontae wants to stay and Aaron Rodgers isn't there, he doesn't have any other quarterbacks to jump to at this point. So if they can renegotiate that deal, I think the Jets can win 10 games if Justin Fields is the quarterback. But it feels like pleading, ultimately saying, yeah, you know what, Aaron, we want to give you one more year. It just feels like that's what's going to happen here. I hope not, and I don't think the Jets will make the playoffs if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback. So my head says Aaron Rodgers will be the quarterback. My heart hopes that it's Justin Fields and maybe somebody else on a prove-it deal, on a one-year prove-it deal here, but I want Justin Fields to be the quarterback, and ultimately I think it's going to be Rodgers coming back again.
I tend to agree. I think Glenn is going to roll with Rodgers 1 year. Their guys, they definitely played against each other, right? Like Aaron Glenn was still playing when Rodgers entered the league, I feel like. Is that accurate? Aaron Glenn was drafted in 99. How long did he play for?
No, Aaron Glenn was drafted before that, wasn't he?
I don't know. Close enough.
He was drafted in 1994, and his last year was 2008. So yeah, you know what, actually?
Yeah. So did Rodgers start in 08? Is that when he started? I think so, right? So there you go. Nonetheless, I think Glenn will roll with Rodgers. I think you're right. As a non-Jets fan, I'm kind of more interested to see what Rodgers can look like. Is there an argument to be had that he gets healthier and looks better a year removed from the Achilles, like a full year removed? There's an argument for it. He's freaking 40. So it's not a great argument, but there is an argument, right? So I don't know. I think my money would be on Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback. Whether that's a good thing or not, only time will tell. And I'll end with this. back to Ryan Day. I guess he's top of mind because of Ohio State. I'm sorry to keep rubbing it in your face, Pat, with your Notre Dame
That's okay.
Fighting Irish loss there. But David Pollack was talking about Ryan Day on the Ryan Russillo podcast, and he was talking about how, yeah, he seems a little bit awkward sometimes, and he seems a little arrogant sometimes, and all this stuff that kind of goes into who he is and what he is. But at the end of the day, do the people in that room believe he is being genuine and being that guy, being himself? And that's kind of the most important thing. And I feel like that's going to come down to the same situation for Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn can't try to be Dan Campbell. He can't try to be, some other coach that was successful that he played for or whatever. He needs to be the exact guy who he was as the DC for the Lions on a bigger scale with a little bit more managerial juice. And that's it. He has to be Aaron Glenn. And I think that'll make Jets fans happy, at least until they start losing. But I think he has the ingredients, which I said before. So we shall see. Pat Boyle. That's all we got. A quick one on Subway Sports Talk today. We did hit the over. Shout out Cody O'Connor. We said the over-under was a 16.5, and let's be real. That was easy money. Easy money for the book.
And he said he was going to ladder it too. And I think if this clock that I'm seeing is correct, we're up to 26 minutes here, 26 and a half.
Yeah, but maybe we didn't start until about 2 minutes in. So maybe we'll see. We'll see where the time clock ends, and maybe Cody didn't win that much money on the over.
I think this is like some Jonte Porter stuff going on right now. You're milking so Cody can hit that 25-minute, that last piece of the ladder.
Cody got me in. He gave me a cut. Well, all we know is if Cody was on this podcast, and he'll love this, because if Cody was on this, we're going 45. If
Minimum.
The three of us get in a room, it's impossible. We're not going 20 minutes. It's impossible. Come on. That's it. That's all we got. A short one on Subway Sports Talk. Follow Pat Boyle at Pat Boyle 44. Pat, anything for you on the Fan this weekend?
No, sir. I got some LIU hoops broadcasts. LIU men. I'm doing the women both Thursday and Saturday. The men are away this week. But how about the LIU Sharks? Men's hoops. They are 6-0 in conference play. They might be, the 16 seed that takes down a 1 seed this year in March. So just you heard it here first. In a month from now, when people are saying who's going to be the next 15 or who's going to be the next 16 seed that could do it if they make the tournament, look out for the LIU Sharks. Malachi Davis, dog, and head coach Rod Strickland, Knicks legend.
Rod Strickland.
Got the boys playing. It's got the boys scrapping. We
love to hear it. Shout out LIU and shout out Pat Boyle. All right, that's all we got. Subway Sports Talk. Hit us on socials at Subway Sports Talk. Send some love on the socials, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, the whole nine. Also subscribe on your podcast app, Apple, Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate y'all. We're pumping out the content here on Subway Sports Talk in 2025. So jump aboard. We appreciate y'all a ton. That's all we got. Pat Boyle, Pete Kennedy. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.